May 9, 1945. This date marks the culmination of the Great Patriotic War for the Soviet Red Army, a brutal confrontation between one of the most powerful armies of the 20th century and the war machine of Nazi Germany. The capital of the Nazi Empire trembled. 3 million Red Army soldiers, having marched from the frozen fields of Stalingrad to the gates of Germany itself, stood ready. How could a military figure like Adolf Hitler fall so completely before the formidable leader, Joseph Stalin? Right now, join us as we journey back in time to the decisive moments of the Second World War, the day the Third Reich officially collapsed. This is the Battle of Berlin, 1945. By April 1945, the lands controlled by Germany were encircled, its military no longer strong enough to alter the situation or regain the initiative. In a calculated move of deception, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin informed General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Western Europe, that Berlin was not a primary objective for the Soviet Army. At that time, the Western Allied forces comprised approximately 2 million soldiers ready for the final assault, including 1.5 million Americans, 400,000 British and Polish troops, and 100,000 French soldiers. In stark contrast to Stalin's words, the Soviet Union had actually mobilized 2 million soldiers and officers for the Berlin operation alone, supported by 6,250 tanks and 7,500 aircraft, with the goal of capturing the capital before April 22nd, Lenin's birthday. On April 16th, two massive Soviet fronts, the First Belarusian Front commanded by Marshal Georgy Zhukov and the First Ukrainian Front commanded by Marshal Ivan Konev, launched their offensive on Berlin across a 300-kilometer front. On the main axis of attack, Zhukov's First Belarusian Front launched a direct assault on the German defenses at the Silo Heights, a strategic position west of the Oder River. To slow the Red Army's advance, German soldiers had intentionally flooded the plains before the heights, forcing Zhukov into a bloody frontal assault on the well-prepared defenses. In a move to create psychological impact during the night battle, Zhukov ordered 150 anti-aircraft searchlights to be aimed directly at the German positions, hoping to blind and disorient the defenders. However, the tactic proved largely ineffective. The defense at the Silo Heights, commanded by the experienced General Gotthard Heinrichi, inflicted heavy casualties on the Red Army, stalling the advance. Faced with this stalemate and to spur more decisive action, Stalin declared that if Zhukov did not break through quickly, he would redirect Marshal Konev's armies from the south to take Berlin instead. Challenged and fearing the loss of the primary role in capturing the capital, Zhukov committed all of his forces, including his reserve tank armies. With overwhelming superiority, the Red Army finally broke through the German lines at Silo Heights after 3 days of fierce and bloody fighting. By April 19th, the last defensive line was crushed. Approximately 210,000 German soldiers were forced to retreat, only to be quickly encircled in the Halbe forest, where 90% of them were either killed or captured over the next 2 weeks. With the defensive line completely shattered, the road from Silo to Berlin was now a wide-open operational gap. To the south, the offensive of the First Ukrainian Front under Marshal Konev proceeded smoothly from day one. The German Army Group Center, commanded by Field Marshal Ferdinand Schorner, coordinated poorly. Crucially, the 4th Panzer Army failed in its mission to protect the southern flank of the 9th Army, which was defending the Silo Heights. Exploiting this gap, Konev's forces rapidly broke through and advanced westward, throwing the entire German defensive line into disarray. This powerful breakthrough directly aided Zhukov's forces in finally overwhelming the stubborn defenses at Silo. Seeing Zhukov's slow progress, Stalin directed Konev to swing his main tank armies north, executing a pincer movement to encircle Berlin from the south. By April 20th, Konev's vanguard units had reached Potsdam, just southwest of Berlin. Faced with the imminent encirclement of Berlin, Hitler ordered the German 12th Army, which was facing American forces to the west, to turn east and counterattack Konev's spearheads. However, the German forces were exhausted and shattered, no match for the superior numbers and equipment of the Red Army. These counterattack efforts were almost completely ineffective and failed to change the course of the battle. To the north, the Second Belarusian Front, commanded by Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, launched a fierce attack, crossing the Oder River and pinning down the German 3rd Panzer Army, preventing it from relieving Berlin from the north. By April 24, 1945, elements of Zhukov's and Konev's armies linked up southeast of Berlin, completing the encirclement of the main German force defending the city. Just one day later, on April 25th, their forces met again west of Berlin, officially sealing the entire city off from the rest of the world. Berlin was now completely isolated. The fate of the Third Reich was a matter of days. On that same day, Konev's 5th Guards Army pushed west and met the U.S. First Army at Torgau on the Elbe River, a symbolic, historic link-up of the two Allied fronts on German soil. The Red Army then entered the final phase, eliminating the remaining pockets of German resistance in a brutal battle for the capital itself. The fight for Berlin was a complex and ferocious affair. In their desperation, German forces fought to the last. The two sides contested every street and every house, turning Berlin into a fiery hellscape. The shoulder-fired Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon, distributed widely to civilians, became a serious threat to Soviet tanks in the narrow urban environment. Nearly 2,000 Soviet tanks and armored vehicles were destroyed within Berlin alone. To counter these tactics, the Red Army broke down its tank and artillery forces into smaller units to coordinate directly with infantry assault groups. They fired cannons directly into windows and suspected strongpoints. With their vast experience, they would first destroy ammo depots, then isolate pockets of resistance, and methodically annihilate them one by one. By April 29th, the remaining defenders, mostly loyal SS units, had been pushed back into the government district around the Reichstag building and the Reich Chancellery, where Hitler's bunker was located. This became the final fortress of the Third Reich. On April 29th, the final assault on the Reichstag began. After intense artillery and air bombardment, Red Army units launched a fierce, close-quarters charge into the symbolic building. The battle was incredibly savage, as the two sides fought for every room, every hallway, and every staircase, in a battle of no quarter. By April 30th, most of the German and SS defenders had been eliminated. In that iconic moment, two Soviet reconnaissance soldiers, Sergeant Mikhail Yegorov and Junior Sergeant Melaton Kantaria, raised the Soviet flag atop the dome of the Reichstag, signifying the final victory of the Red Army over Nazism. On that same day, deep in his bunker, Adolf Hitler, refusing to be captured, married Eva Braun, and then, together, they committed suicide. Before his death, Hitler's will appointed Admiral Karl Dönitz as the new Reich president and propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels as chancellor. Goebbels sent General Hans Krebs to negotiate with the Soviets, but Marshal Zhukov gave the Germans just over an hour to accept unconditional surrender. When the deadline passed with no answer, the fierce fighting resumed. On May 1st, just before the Red Army stormed the Chancellery bunker, Joseph Goebbels and his wife poisoned their 6 children before taking their own lives. By May 2, 1945, with nothing left to fight for, General Helmuth Weidling, the commander of the Berlin defense area, ordered all remaining forces to surrender. Berlin had completely fallen. On May 7, 1945, in Reims, France, General Alfred Jodl signed a document of unconditional surrender to representatives of the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. However, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin rejected this ceremony, arguing that a surrender in France did not properly reflect the immense role and sacrifices of the Red Army. Stalin demanded that the official surrender ceremony must take place in Berlin, presided over by a high-ranking representative of the Red Army. The Allied leaders agreed. On the night of May 8, 1945, in Berlin, Marshal Georgy Zhukov presided over the official signing of Nazi Germany's unconditional surrender, witnessed by high-ranking military representatives from the UK, France, and the USA. Due to the time difference, when the surrender became effective, It was already May 9th in Moscow. And so, every year on May 9th, Moscow's Red Square becomes the center of global attention. Amidst the historic space of the Kremlin, the Victory Day parade is held with solemnity and immense pride. Tanks, self-propelled artillery, and modern ballistic missiles are not just a display of strength, but a reminder that Russia will never forget its past and is always ready to defend its future. This is Russia's way of projecting its military might, a message to the world that it is capable of defending itself against any hostile force.